What's up everybody, Griffey here. It's impossible to make a movie that everyone loves. These are just a few of the best films out there that the stupid critics didn't seem to appreciate. There's a cheat code that filmmakers use sometimes when they're looking to give their projects a little extra oomph. That cheat code is named Denzel Washington. Director Tony Scott, action movie maestro and brother of Ridley, worked with Washington 5 times over the course of his career, and each of their collaborations is worth a watch on the biggest screen possible. Unfortunately, critics didn't think that was the case for their second film together, 2004's Man on Fire. Washington plays John Creasy, a washed-up, alcoholic bodyguard who gets a shot at redemption when he's hired to protect a 9-year-old girl in Mexico City. The two soon develop an adorable bond, but Creasy's happiness is snatched away when gangsters kidnap her for ransom. If you've seen the Equalizer movies, you know what comes next. Ass-kicking, Denzel Washington style. Man on Fire is a story about a badass getting cold, hard revenge, but some critics found it too cold and too hard. It's a heartwarming movie about fathers and daughters and what self-respecting dad, if it meant getting justice for his kid, wouldn't cut off a bad guy's finger. If you haven't seen Man on Fire, just ignore the rotten reviews. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and this movie is best watched right now. The Lonely Island is responsible for some of Saturday Night Live's finest digital shorts, and their first movie Hot Rod proved that they could keep a joke going for at least 88 minutes. Andy Samberg stars as Rod Kimball, a wannabe stuntman with all of the bravery and none of the skills required for the job. Despite his constant failures, Rod refuses to give up his daredevil dreams. When his crotchety stepdad Frank needs money for heart surgery, Rod decides to perform an epic stunt to save his life, just so he'll have the chance to defeat him in hand-to-hand combat.
You'll see, Frank. One day I'll punch you right in the face, and then you'll respect me.
I'll believe it when I see it, muchacho.
With the help of his loyal friends, Rod tests his skills and tries to impress the girl next door in the process. Along the way, there's an amazing Footloose parody, a peaceful march that descends into anarchy.
What the hell? Was that because of us? I don't know, I mean, it started off super positive.
And perhaps the greatest falling down a hill scene in cinematic history. After watching this film, you will never hear the phrase cool beans the same way again, and you certainly won't ever challenge a taco to a fight. Critics said it was stupid, but a better word to use is sincere.
Cool beans.
Cool beans.
Cool beans.
Cool beans.
Cool beans.
Relationships are hard, especially when CIA mind control is involved. That's definitely the case in the 2015 film American Ultra, starring Jesse Eisenberg and Kristen Stewart. Critics weren't wild about the latest feature from the director of Project X, but plenty of people enjoyed watching the guy from The Social Network try to propose to his girlfriend while killing people in plenty of creative ways. Mike is wasting his life away working in a convenience store and smoking too much weed. But like a West Virginian Luke Skywalker, he soon finds out he has incredible abilities. Instead of the Force though, he has the CIA in his brain, as they gave him incredible combat abilities and turned him into a sleeper agent as part of a top secret project. With the help of his girlfriend Phoebe, the newly reactivated Mike takes on waves of assassins that are seeking to tie up loose ends. Whether you're in the mood for a Jason Bourne-style action flick or a relationship stoner comedy, American Ultra is a pretty solid choice for movie night, even though critics might not agree. Critics loved Ryan Gosling as a replicant, as a nice guy, and a living Ken doll, but as a director, not so much. Lost River was Gosling's 2015 directorial debut, and critics came to the unified conclusion that he should probably stick to acting.
Deep breath.
That's not quite fair though, as this surreal dystopian sci-fi flick is seriously underappreciated. Starring Christina Hendricks, Ben Mendelsohn, and Saoirse Ronan, Lost River follows the plight of a small family surviving in a dystopian Detroit. The plot isn't anything to write about, but what's more impressive are the images Gosling captures. This is a really good-looking movie. And even though critics accuse Gosling of taking too many cues from David Lynch and his frequent collaborator Nicholas Winding Refn, it's undeniably impressive. There aren't many other movies where you can see Matt Smith holding court atop an automobile throne or a boy sailing onto a river full of half-submerged streetlights. Even though he's been too busy being a gray man and a fall guy to direct another feature, it's clear that Gosling has a good eye behind the camera. I hope his next movie in the director's seat is even weirder.
This here's the Bad Batch.
Is Mad Max mad enough for you, or do you want a little more cannibalism in your desert dystopia? If that's your taste, then you might want to check out The Bad Batch. Even though lots of people found it unsavory, a special group of horror and sci-fi fans found it incredibly delicious. Suki Waterhouse plays Arlen, a young woman who's been exiled from the US and condemned to wander the wastelands. She ends up as the main course for a group of bodybuilding cannibals, and even though she manages to escape, it literally cost her an arm and a leg. A few months and a prosthetic limb later, Arlen picks up a little girl. Unfortunately for her, the kid's dad is played by Jason Momoa. He's Miami Man, the cannibal king, and artist extraordinaire who's willing to do anything to find his missing daughter. Naturally, Arlen and Miami Man eventually cross paths, along with the cult leader played by Keanu Reeves and his army of Uzi-packing pregnant women. Also, Jim Carrey is there. There's a lot going on. It's all exactly as ridiculous and enjoyable as it sounds, but that didn't stop the majority of critics and audience members from writing it off. I think The Bad Batch is still worth a watch, if you can stomach it. Mark Wahlberg is far from critics' favorite actor, but there's no denying that the man is an artist when it comes to playing lone wolves and loose cannons.
I'm a peacock! You gotta let me fly!
Just take a look at 2007's Shooter, starring Mark Wahlberg as the incredibly named Bob Lee Swagger. This Antoine Fuqua-directed conspiracy thriller has him doing what he does best. Years ago, Marine Gunnery Sergeant Swagger was left to die while running a covert mission in Africa, and the disillusioned sniper now spends his days living in the mountains with his dog. But when a shady government agent frames Swagger for an assassination he didn't commit, the sergeant grabs a rifle and goes on the run, hoping to teach the bad guys a thing or two about American values.
The world ain't what it seems, is it, Gunny?
No, sir.
You keep that in mind.
This is the role that Wahlberg was born to play. He even went to boot camp and trained with an actual sniper to prepare for the part. Watching Swagger get his swagger on and go MacGyver mode is nothing short of a blast. Literally. Coming hot off the first two Iron Man movies, director Jon Favreau released a movie that might have the most straightforward name of all time, Cowboys and Aliens. This Western sci-fi mashup is exactly what it says on the tin. Starring Daniel Craig as an outlaw who becomes a small New Mexico town's unlikely savior when otherworldly visitors arrive. The year is 1873. Jake Lonergan can't remember who he is or where he's been, but he soon realizes that he has a mysterious metal bracelet on his arm and a bounty on his head. That last part goes out the window when extraterrestrial invaders abduct the citizens of Absolution. Using the mysterious technology at his disposal, he teams up with the local Apache tribe along with Olivia Wilde and Harrison Ford. Some critics expected the tone of Cowboys and Aliens to be more ironic, but they were surprised to learn that the movie takes its own premise incredibly seriously. No winks or nods to the camera, this is just a straight up Western where the bad guys just so happen to be from outer space. The creature design is great, and the action scenes are intense, and the cast is full of familiar faces. On the other end of the straightforward movie title spectrum is Rod Lurie's 2001 feature The Last Castle, which isn't actually about a castle at all. Instead, it's about a prison, and Robert Redford is one of its inmates. Redford plays Lieutenant General Eugene Irwin, a once decorated soldier who, for the crime of insubordination, is sentenced to 10 years inside a military prison known as the Castle. James Gandolfini plays Colonel Ed Winter, the castle's sadistic warden, who doesn't mind murdering inmates to keep things under control. Naturally, Irwin has some issues with his new living conditions, so he starts whipping his fellow inmates back into shape and reminding them that they were soldiers. Soon he's created his own army, and he plans on restoring some order to the castle through any means necessary. It's an unstoppable force against an immovable object, but who comes out on top? You'll just have to see The Last Castle for yourself. There are some universal truths in this world, and one of them is that dragons are really cool.
That is some dragon costume you got there, Duncan.
It's a child's extra large.
Movies, shows, video games, they're all improved when they have one or more dragons added into the mix. Nevertheless, critics in 2002 weren't too impressed by Reign of Fire, which pits Christian Bale, Matthew McConaughey, and Gerard Butler against a legion of winged lizards. In the far-off era of 2020, a ragtag band of survivors have set up shop in a moody Northumberland castle, filled with wax candles and steampunk pipes. Forced to live in a world of fire ever since dragons emerged 20 years earlier, the survivors have created flame-resistant suits and armored water trucks to extinguish beastly blazes. When it comes to technology, it's a mix of Middle Ages and World War II, complete with falconers and field telephones. And then there's bald Matthew McConaughey as a cigar-chomping, dragon-slaying, tatted-up commando with his own private army.
We can do this easy, or we can do it real easy.
While the scenery is shrouded in smoke and the world is covered in ash, Reign of Fire has a quirky sense of humor that offsets the grit and grime. Yes, the CGI dragons occasionally look like they escaped from a PlayStation game, but this is still a heart-pounding story about the struggle between man and beast. When The Ghost in the Darkness roared into theaters, critics weren't exactly crazy about the R-rated safari adventure. Roger Ebert actually gave the movie less than 1 star, saying in his review, "It makes the Tarzan movies look subtle and realistic." If you want something realistic, watch Out of Africa. If you want a blood-soaked thriller in which Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas go head-to-head with a couple of man-eating lions, it's time to hunt down this 1996 action flick. Based on an incredible true story, The Ghost in the Darkness finds Kilmer playing Colonel John Henry Patterson, a soldier brought to Tsavo, Kenya, where 2 hungry cats start turning railroad employees into fast food. But there's something strange about these felines. It's almost as if they're evil spirits in animal form. And if you're going to fight demons, then you might just need to team up with the devil himself. That would be big game hunter Charles Remington.
Oh, you're right. The devil has come to Tsavo. Look at me. I am the devil.
The Ghost in the Darkness is essentially Jaws, but with lions. And even though it doesn't reach the heights of Spielberg's aquatic classic, it's still worth 110 minutes of your time. Most say he's an urban legend, but others think he's the real deal. Whichever way you lean though, the Mothman Prophecies is both underseen and underappreciated. Richard Gere stars as John Klein, a Washington Post reporter who discovers some creepy things happening in the less than pleasant town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. People are having disturbing dreams of impending doom while others are receiving mysterious phone calls from supernatural beings. It probably has something to do with the winged creature that's been flying around. Just a hunch.
At first, all I could see were these 2 red eyes. I kept looking at it.
Either way, Klein comes to believe that it's somehow able to reconnect him with his dead wife. When the Mothman Prophecies fluttered its way into theaters, quite a few critics tried their best to swat it down. One person who really enjoyed it though was Oscar-winning filmmaker and monster aficionado Guillermo del Toro. If the man who made Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water thinks your movie's impressive, you've definitely done something right. 3 years after Ocean's 11, director Steven Soderbergh returned to the world of con men and casino crimes with 2004's Ocean's 12. Evidently, critics weren't quite ready for a sequel. While the original sits with an 82% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, Part 2 only has a measly 55%, making it the worst reviewed entry of the original franchise. That doesn't mean that it's not a slick romp full of clever twists and witty banter. After spending all their ill-gotten gains from the first film, Danny Ocean and his merry band suddenly find themselves in serious debt when fleeced casino owner Terry Benedict shows up at their doorsteps. Desperate for cash, the crew heads off to Europe, where they encounter a vengeful master thief and a savvy Europol detective who's got a lot of history with a member of the crew.
Catherine Zeta-Jones, she dips beneath the lasers. Ooh.
Just like the first film, the chemistry between the crooks is a highlight. Scenes like the Night Fox's dance through lasers and the lifting of an entire house to crack a safe are some of the best in the franchise. Even though the part where Tess disguises herself as Julia Roberts has been clowned on by some critics, it's still a pretty hysterical meta moment. Ocean's 12 is an ocean away from being a bad movie. Long before he became an indie comedy darling for What We Do in the Shadows and joined the Marvel Universe with Thor Ragnarok, Taika Waititi broke onto the scene as a director with Eagle vs. Shark in 2007. Starring Lauren Horsley and Waititi's frequent collaborator, Jermaine Clement, this New Zealand comedy has a lot of laughs and even more heart. Lily is a lonely fast food worker who's smitten with a candle-making nerd named Jared. After bonding over their shared love of predatory animals and video games, the two head off to Jared's hometown, where he plans on getting revenge on a childhood bully.
So, your favorite animal is a shark?
Yep.
Pretty cool. I almost came as a shark actually, but then I realized that an eagle's slightly better.
In true Waititi fashion, what starts off as a quirky comedy involving shark outfits and martial arts becomes a surprisingly moving story about grief, loneliness, and the need to belong. It's no hunt for the wilder people, but Clement and Horsley make a lovely oddball couple who bond during their quest to shuck off the past and find the perfect animal costume. How do you turn a short story about a guy daydreaming during a shopping trip into a movie? By changing pretty much everything about it, of course. Directed by and starring Ben Stiller, 2013's The Secret Life of Walter Mitty has the same name as James Thurber's short story, but it turns a series of fantasies into a grand voyage across the globe. Walter Mitty is a negative assets manager at Life magazine. When he's not pining for his coworker, he's dreaming up all sorts of imaginary ways to make his life more exciting.
I'm Walter. Mitty.
Cheryl. Melhoff.
Where have you been?
Testing the limits of the human spirit.
Walter has no intentions of turning them into reality until he loses a valuable negative, one that apparently captures the quintessence of life. Desperate to find the photo, he travels across the world searching for the man who took it. Walter's journey takes him to some of the most beautifully wide open places in the world, including Iceland, Greenland, and Afghanistan. Afghanistan? Did that not strike anyone else as bizarre? But despite all the gorgeous shots of the desolate locales, only about half of critics seem to appreciate the rest of it. Crime is a business and businesses need accountants. That's the niche that Ben Affleck's character in 2016's The Accountant has found. And although it pays well, his job has a few deadly downsides. Christian Wolf is an autistic man whose talents for math and long-time combat training make him perfectly suited for financial crimes. He takes a legit job auditing a robotics company to cover his tracks, but when the Treasury Department catches wind of Wolf's wrongdoings, he has to fight to save himself and his new friend Dana.
What's the plan?
Find the person who wants to kill her.
And?
Shoot them in the head.
With the government on his tail, the stage is set for a hell of a confrontation, and plenty of family drama. The Accountant was popular and lucrative enough to earn a 2025 sequel, but critics found it meandering and even a bit offensive. Only 53% of critics on Rotten Tomatoes approved, compared to 77% of audience members who enjoyed watching Affleck get analytical. With Anna Kendrick, John Bernthal, and J.K. Simmons as supporting characters, The Accountant has plenty to appreciate. There have been countless movies about the horrors of the Vietnam War, as several million Americans, many of whom were drafted, were sent overseas to fight in a conflict that they couldn't fully understand. A shortage of beer was far from the worst issue that those on the front lines dealt with, but plenty dreamed about cracking open a cold one. In The Greatest Beer Run Ever, Zac Efron plays a merchant marine who decides that the best thing he can do to support his friends overseas is bring them some Pabst Blue Ribbon. You should never say it any other way other than Dennis Hopper.
Pabst Blue Ribbon!
Pabst Blue Ribbon! That should just be their commercial. Based on the real-life journey of John Chicky Donahue, The Greatest Beer Run Ever follows an unlikely hero as he travels to Saigon after the death of a friend. The ride there is the easy part though. The challenge is making his way from base to base, getting his buddies buzzed, and making it out in one piece.
I know guns. I was in the military.
Where'd you serve?
Massachusetts.
Yeah, give me that.
Critics weren't as enthralled as audiences were, amounting to a split between the two of 43% and 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. Either way, Beer Run is an emotional roller coaster that doesn't shy away from depicting the horrors of war. Jackpot is a 2024 Amazon Prime original about Katie, a young woman in dystopian California who has to go on the run after winning $3.6 billion in the grand lottery. She can claim her winning ticket after sundown, assuming one of the losing participants doesn't kill her for it. It's all legal and encouraged in the rules, of course. You're right to think that this sounds an awful lot like The Running Man, and even though Awkwafina is no Arnold, it's still an enjoyable action comedy, especially once John Cena shows up and offers to protect her for a cut of the winnings.
Holy crap, did that look as cool as it felt?
Directed by Paul Feig of Freaks and Geeks and Bridesmaids fame, Jackpot is at its best when everyday people try their hand at assassination and fail in hilarious fashion. It didn't win a positive critical response though, as more than 2/3 of critics on Rotten Tomatoes failed to give it a positive rating. Sure, it's maybe not the kind of movie worth buying a Prime Video subscription for, but if you already have one, take a chance on Jackpot. Yes, the title and concept are pretty aggressively generic, But The Gray Man proved that directors Anthony and Joe Russo don't need to be in the Marvel Universe to make exciting movies. They just need Chris Evans. The former Captain America takes a villainous turn in the 2022 thriller as he hunts down a CIA agent played by Ryan Gosling. After Gosling's agent, Sierra 6, uncovers a conspiracy within his own agency, he finds himself the target of Evans' mercenary Lloyd Hansen. Now on the run, Six embarks on a dangerous odyssey, but no matter where in the world he goes, he can't escape that mustache.
Lloyd, please, pull everyone out now. Lloyd!
Extra $10 million to the first guy to put a bullet in this Ken doll's brain.
The Gray Man may not be the best paced film of all time, but it is worth it when you get to those incredible action sequences. The cast might not be Avengers Endgame level, but outside of Gosling and Evans, it features Ana de Armas and Billy Bob Thornton and plenty of others. Critics weren't especially kind to The Gray Man, focusing on its derivative plot, but some stuff you don't watch for the plot. If you want to see some of the biggest stars in the world alongside some of the biggest explosions on Netflix, The Gray Man is what you're looking for. For a long time, video game movies were destined to be schlocky disappointments, but in the 2020s, something shifted. The fact that 2022's Uncharted was a somewhat better than decent adaptation of the PlayStation series made it incredibly impressive when compared to its predecessors. Fans of the Uncharted games know Nathan Drake is an explorer extraordinaire, but when we meet the version of him played by Tom Holland in the movie, he's a little less experienced. Nate embarks on a worldwide quest to find Magellan's treasure, and his brother Sam, with the help of Mark Wahlberg's Victor Sully Sullivan. They land in plenty of trouble, launching a series of grand set pieces and beautifully choreographed action sequences as they try to preserve priceless artifacts.
You say preserving, but you mean looting, right?
Well, if I didn't take him, somebody else would have.
Uncharted is a lot of fun whether you've played the games it's based on or not, but critics didn't see it that way. The film garnered a 44% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, considerably lower than the 89% audience response. Critics suggested that the film didn't live up to the game's legacy, while audiences enjoyed Uncharted because they thought that it did. Who's right? That's up to you to decide. 999 is a 2016 heist film directed by John Hillcoat, and there's a good chance you know at least 9 people in the cast. This movie is totally stacked, with appearances by Oscar winners Kate Winslet and Casey Affleck, erstwhile superheroes Gal Gadot and Anthony Mackie, TV stars Aaron Paul, Norman Reedus, and Michael K. Williams, and certified cool guy Woody Harrelson. Leading the pack is Michael Atwood, a criminal mastermind facing up against the Russian mob. After carrying out a bank heist for a backstabbing mafia boss, Atwood and his gang are forced to pull off one last job in an extremely well-guarded building. Knowing that their lives are on the line, Atwood and his thugs decide to go for a 999, which means killing a police officer to draw attention away from their upcoming robbery. Of course, this causes a bit of tension in Atwood's crew, especially since 2 of his lackeys are crooked cops. As D-Day gets nearer, the airtight plan starts falling apart, and a lot of people end up violently murdered. Critics didn't love 999, and while it never reaches the levels of heist classics like Heat, it still grabs a hold of you and never lets go. The success of Disney's live-action Cinderella and Jungle Book remakes led to a flood of reimaginings of classic films from the studio starring real humans, with a big exception. In the 2019 version of The Lion King, it's nothing but CGI animals as far as the eye can see. There are some story and song changes, but this is basically a much more real-looking remake of the original movie, and the original movie is really good. We all know the story of The Lion King, which itself is taken from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Young Simba watches his father die, grows up, and defeats his uncle Scar to claim his position as the king of the Pride Lands. The newer version follows the same path, but with even more celebrity voices and visuals that trade stylization for realistic detail. Audiences clearly accepted the remake, as the film's popcorn meter on Rotten Tomatoes sits at 88%. Conversely, critics weren't impressed, giving the film a rating of just 51%. While it's no replacement for the original, 2019's The Lion King is far from the worst of Disney's live-action attempts. After the critical disaster that was 1993's live-action Super Mario Bros., Nintendo was too afraid to let everyone's favorite mustachioed Koopa Stomper return to the big screen for 3 decades. When they did, he was animated and voiced by Chris Pratt, but even though the critics weren't terribly impressed, 2023's The Super Mario Bros. Movie is far from a nightmare.
So this is not a dream?
Ah! That hurt, right?
Yes!
Definitely not a dream.
If you've ever wondered how two Italian plumbers ended up in the Mushroom Kingdom, the Super Mario Bros. Movie has the answer. After they're sucked into a magic pipe and Luigi becomes Bowser's prisoner, the red-hatted hero has to team up with Princess Peach and the Kongs to save his brother, and multiple worlds. Anyone who's ever played a Mario game before will be able to appreciate the 40 years of franchise history on display in the film. Lots of people did, as it earned $1.36 billion during its theatrical run, but only 59% of critics found it to be a worthwhile watch according to Rotten Tomatoes. At the same time, 95% of general audience reactions were positive according to the site, just one of many, many times that the two groups have disagreed on a film's merits.